So welcome everybody. This year is a special year for the Center for Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance because we are celebrating 10 years here at the University of Canberra. So we thought to mark this occasion, we raised 10 big questions across the year and ask about the big challenges that deliberative democracy and the study of deliberative democracy faces today. So my name is Hans Asenbaum. I'm a senior research fellow here at the center, and I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting here today on the territories, the unceded territories of the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians of this land. I would like to extend my respect and my gratitude to their elders past, present, and emerging, and to all First Nations people here with us today. So this session is going to be recorded and it's going to be on our YouTube channel as all our other seminars as well. I'll briefly introduce the series because this is the first conversation in this series which will consist of 10 parts. Adele Webb is convening the series and she asked me to introduce it. So to mark this 10th year anniversary of our center, we reflect back on the scholarship on deliberative democracy that exists, and we have really come a long way. We have asked big and interesting and challenging questions, but at this point in history, we also see that we are in the context of multiple crises, a crisis of democracy, a crisis of the planet itself. So we thought, rather than going into the details of our research, we want to raise these big questions, these big challenges. So over the next year, over this year, we will each month raise one question that two brilliant researchers will, and also practitioners will answer in conversation. We will tackle issues such as deliberative democracy in neoliberal times, asking questions about the political economy, about decolonization, about mini-publics versus the public sphere. So the big questions will be the topics of this series of conversations over this year. So our first question, we thought we'll start with one that's really, really interesting, that is really challenging, probably for most of us. It's one of these big questions about non-human participation, non-human deliberation. We asked the question, how can deliberative democracy listen to non-humans? So just briefly to make this accessible, to unpack the question a little bit, by deliberative democracy, we refer to an idea of direct engagement versus parliamentary elections and voting and counting. We're thinking about deliberation as a practice, as an inclusive, egalitarian practice where reasons are offered to understand each other. So a different understanding of democracy, and by non-humans, we broadly refer to any kind of actors, agents that surround us, including animals, including plants, natural entities like mountains, even bacteria, viruses, but also objects, robots, artificial intelligence. So it's a very broad idea here, but of course our speakers might have a different understanding, so we will hear about this in a minute. We are thrilled to have two excellent speakers with us today. I will briefly introduce them and then we'll dig into this conversation. So Danielle Celermajer is professor in the Department of Sociology and Social Policy at the University of Sydney and the Deputy Director of the Sydney Environment Institute. Her expertise lies in human rights, theories of justice, and the intersection between human, environmental, and animal justice and ethics. Danielle is with us online today. We are very grateful that you're here today. Welcome. And Dr. Frederic Hanusch, sitting right next to me, is the co-founder and scientific manager of the panel on planetary thinking at Justus Liebig University in Gießen in Germany, and also fellow at the New Institute in Hamburg, also in Germany, and the co-convener of the Earth System Governance Project's Working Group on Democracy. And he's currently a distinguished visiting fellow here with us at the center. We're very happy to spend more time with him beyond this seminar. And he just recently published a book, The Politics of Deep Time, with Cambridge University Press. So check out his work as well, and welcome, Frederic. So we are now going to head into the conversation. I'm going to pose this big question to Danielle. How can deliberative democracy listen to non-humans?
Hi, everybody, online and in the room. I'm really sorry that I'm not there physically with you. That would have been really good to be face to face. I am speaking on the unceded land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I similarly want to pay my respects and express my gratitude to elders past, present and emerging for their care for the multi-species relations that allow us to flourish on this land. I think the setup that I'm going to answer the question is somewhat unrealistic. I'm probably going to further problematize the question, but that's always good for a discussion about hard topics. So the first thing I want to say is that I am not a fan of the language of the non-human. That's apparently could be a trivial point, but given the relegation of who I call Earth others to the other side of this ontological and ethical Rubicon that has been set up by colonial and capitalist modernity, given that that is at the root of the planetary crisis that presumably we're trying to get at through inclusion of Earth others in deliberative practices, I think we need to also think about the language that we're using and how that sets us up. So I think of language as being the discursive dimension of a set of linked institutional apparatuses that include democratic practices that normalize treating certain types of beings as the types of beings that humans have the right to extract, exploit, kill, use, destroy, and so on. I'm not going to be speaking about all non-humans. I'm going to be speaking about Earth others. So I'm not going to be speaking about AI or machines. I'm going to be speaking about what we might broadly call other animals and nature, or who I call Earth others. Before I go on, I'm just going to say three things that I think are really important that I'm not going to talk about that we might come back to. The first is I'm not going to distinguish amongst Earth others. So I'm going to speak at quite a high level of generality about some principles and practices that are going to differ depending on if we're speaking about ecological relationships, rivers, forests, animals subject to experimentation and so on. And I think those differences are important, but I'm not going to speak about them. The second thing is I'm not going to problematize the term listening, because I think listening is not always going to be the modality. And I think we need to think about multiple perceptual and other access points. And I'm also not going to speak about the limits of reason that have been so much at the center of deliberative models. But I think these are three things that we need to problematize when we think about that question. So to start with, and particularly given the context of this series, I think it's really critical to acknowledge that it was people like John Dryzak, Bob Gooden, and Robin Eckersley who already, over 30 years ago, were insisting that from an ethical point of view, Earth others ought to be included in practices of democratic deliberation and decision-making. And the ethical case that they were making that still applies is that given the undeniable and usually highly deleterious impact that political decisions about ecological systems and Earth others have on their capacity to function and flourish, there's a prima facie violation in not including them in some form in those decisions from the point of view of the all affected interests principle. Or if it doesn't strike us as a violation, and it usually doesn't strike us as a violation, that Earth others are excluded from deliberation or political decision, that's because of the hold that the view that only humans merit, moral considerability, or only humans are political beings, that hold is so strongly held on us that we don't notice this prima facie violation, as well as the hold of a separatist ontology that has us continue, or has had most people within the context. When I use us, I'm talking broadly about people within the context of modernist, capitalist, colonial societies, that this view that because of human exceptionalism and human separatism, that it would be possible to serve the interests of humans without actually looking at what are the interests of the ecological conditions that are always the conditions of possibility for humans to flourish. So in their early writings, both Gooden and Dryzek put forward the view that deliberative democratic practices in themselves, even without more explicit forms of representation of Earth others, would be more likely to lead to decisions that took the interests of the environment, for example, into account. Now, they didn't say that it was assured, but especially when deliberative practices occur in the context of evident ecological destruction, they argued that deliberative practices provide a procedural advantage. And this was because they enhance critical reflexivity, they demand accountability, they broaden the range of interests included, and they challenge entrenched hierarchies and systematic marginalization. And I would add to this, and I'll come back to this point, that deliberative practices also have the capacity to illuminate the relational nature of well-being and flourishing as distinct from enforcing the individual nature of interests. But several decades on, we can see that the gap occupied by this qualification, by no means assured, that I mentioned, has been far too large, and that unless there are practices for explicitly bringing in Earth others into deliberative processes, their interests will continue to be elided and trampled. Now, that this is consistent with what we know about representation of all marginalized groups. And in this case, it's particularly so because what counts as the normalized behavior of institutions, legal institutions, political, economic institutions in the context of colonial capitalism is premised on the exploitation and the extraction of Earth others. So I think I just wanted the normative case for explicit inclusion, always with marginalized groups, but in particular because we have to break with what counts as normal ethical practice. So turning to the question of the how of more explicit forms of inclusion, there are a range of ways in which this could happen. In these opening remarks, I'm going to mention a few. But before I get to those, I thought it would be useful to frame the discussion of these practices by setting out quite clearly, why are we doing this? What are we out to achieve by including Earth others? Because we can only evaluate the efficacy of different models or different practices if we know what we're out to achieve. And as I already said, I think it's fairly easy to make the case from procedural justice in terms of the all affected interest principle, but presumably there are also substantive goals that are at stake. And I want to articulate what I think of as three substantive goals of including Earth others. And part of the reason I think it's important to articulate them is because, as you'll see, I think that there is some tension between a couple of them. So the first one, the most obvious one that I've already articulated, is that decisions ought to take into consideration how they'll impact the functioning and flourishing of Earth others. So this attention to procedural justice undergirds a more substantive goal of achieving outcomes that will support ecological systems and relationships and protect Earth others from systematic abuse. So that's the kind of obvious goal. Then the second goal, to put it in simple terms, is to create space for the interests that have been systematically excluded and whose exclusion has been institutionally normalized. That is, the exploitation of Earth others, of forests, soils, oceans, other animals, has been systematically encoded into the structure of dominant cultural, legal, political, and economic institutions. And so against that background, if the interests of Earth others are to shape institutional decisions, then concern for their flourishing and functioning needs to be explicitly untethered from the interests of capitalist, colonial, and more broadly extractivist human systems and forms of life. So what I'm trying to say is that because what's encoded in business as usual is extraction and exclusion of the more than human, we actually have to consciously pull them apart from the way in which human interests tend to get expressed. So it's the second goal. But the third goal, and here you'll see where attention arises, is that I think we want these processes and practices to produce better, healthier, and more ethical, ecological relationships between humans and Earth others. And even more radically, they should have humans come to experience themselves as part of, as opposed to apart from, more than human worlds. You could call this developing ecological consciousness, but I mean something more than that. So we have this broader ontological goal of recasting how humans experience themselves. So you can see that there's a tension between 2 and 3. 2 requires the interests of Earth others to be untethered from humans because of the way in which their interpolation into human interests has encoded their exploitation. And goal 3 requires those interests to be reconnected. I think that works across history, but when we're designing particular practices, they can come into tension with each other. Please tell me when I have to stop at any time, or give me a couple of minutes and I can wind up. So what I want to do now is I just want to talk.
2 minutes are okay?
Okay, then I'll very quickly go through the 4 types of kind of big models that I think exist, and say a couple of words about how we might evaluate them speculatively across these 3 criteria. So the first family of practices are ones that are already in practice, and they involve human participants entering into some sort of imaginative practice where they take on or identify with Earth others. So if any of you went to the talk that Noka ran, Judith Ferrando from Mission Publique in France spoke about the way in which they use these imaginative approaches. It's also the work that Reconnects does in the Council of All Beings. Now, on the first one, I think we have reasons to be dubious that this is going to accurately identify the interests of Earth others, especially if the human participants don't have strong familiarity. On 2, untethering the interests of Earth others from those of humans. I think we also might worry that human participants who are interpolated into an ontology of extractivism and radical separation will collapse those interests. And on 3, this could be a way of developing that relational ontology. The second set of practices would be to have experts present the interests of Earth others to the deliberative assembly, so they come in through the expert voice. That might do a bit better on authentically representing their interests and untethering them, but it's going to, again, do badly on 3. It's going to separate the interests out of Earth others from those of humans, unless it's done in a particular way. The third approach is to have humans in the deliberative process who stand in as proxies for Earth others, amongst other deliberators. So in the same way as we will ensure demographic representation, we would have Earth others in the room. How well that performs on the accuracy of representation depends on who they are. I think there's a danger that it separates out so that we have the interests of Earth others kind of separated out from the interests of humans. But again, that's going to depend on the way in which the process is facilitated. And the fourth approach, the final one, would be to bring Earth others in a more direct way. So not just a representative model, but some sort of participatory model. Now that opens up a whole host of questions like, How does that happen? Does it happen through immersion? So, for example, deliberating in the place that is being affected by the decision, or as Isabel Stenger suggested, talking about how to treat lab rats with the lab rats consciously there as part of the process. Would Earth Others be brought in through artistic practices, through film, through AI? The claim is that we're getting closer to being able to translate animal language, although I think there's reasons to be dubious about that. So I think I'll probably stop there, but in answering the question about how can we listen and offering these 4 different models, I wanted to refract them across the different goals. So when we come to try them out, which is what I think the next step has to be and is already happening, we need to have already in place some evaluative lenses that we're going to use so that as we try them out, we can develop some good data on what sort of effects they produce. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Danielle. This was really insightful. I'm now going to hand over the same question to Frederic. So how can deliberative democracy listen to non-humans?
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, Danielle, speaking after you is quite a challenge because you've developed this field of research within the last decades as a forerunner. So I want to thank you also for having me, for exploring such an important topic to keep the planet habitable in a democratic manner. And I want to thank you, particular thank you to the University of Canberra for awarding me the Deputy Vice Chancellor Research and Enterprise Visiting Distinguished Fellowship that allowed me here to spend a couple of weeks with very inspiring people, colleagues at the Center for Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance. I will start by opening, I will work on this question in my talk in 3 aspects. The first one is about the perspective we take as humans when thinking about how we can listen to the non-human. And when I'm not here doing research on democracy, I'm a beekeeper. And it's quite fascinating to see how bees organize themselves in their colony, how they decide when to split apart, when to raise a new queen, how they decide where to fly, how they communicate, where the most pollen and nectar can be found. And they are, for a certain reason, a central object of study in the science. And when you read yourself into the literature about honeybees and how they organize, you come across also this book, Honeybee Democracy. And it's written by Thomas Seeley, who did research, particularly on the question how bees decide when they split apart and form a new colony, where they will settle. So about, for example, the size of the new home, the size of the entry, and much more. And he developed this term honeybee democracy because he says, and here's a quote from the book, when a honeybee swarm chooses its future home, it practices the form of democracy known as direct democracy, in which the individuals within a community who choose to participate in its decision-making do so personally rather than through representatives. The collective decision-making of a bee swarm therefore resembles a New England town meeting. Of course, there are differences in how direct democracy works between bee swarms and town meetings. This includes, for example, how they communicate. They communicate, of course, not by in an oral form, but they have this way of speaking, so to say, or relating to each other. And so you can think, well, it's great. Maybe we can learn from the bees, right? I mean, they practice their collective decision-making through evolution for millions of years. So what can we maybe learn from these for democracy? But there's also another side to that. Here's a German bee journal from 1942, and this is my own translation. Someone wrote an article in there. Celermajer is the name of the author, and he says, "My dear bees are my teachers and guides, not to slacken in their enthusiasm and willingness to sacrifice. Their working days are dedicated to the common good and the future of their people, and their defense against the enemy cost them their lives. They all subordinate themselves to a leader, because their existence is the preservation of the whole nation. Here we have an exemplary national socialist state." So I think it's always important to see that we have certain concepts of how society functions, how democracies function, how collective decision-making is taking place. And then we interpret with our anthropocentrism also what's going on out in the planet, in groups, in social insects, and many more. And I think the first task would be, if we try to listen to the non-human, or the others, to planetary entities, then we should try to think of them as having their very own structure, their own character, their own rules. And we should not try to interpret them with our concepts we develop for our human societies. The second question, and Daniel already talked about that, is the question of the interface. So if we want to engage and relate to the non-humans, with the others, how do we do that? There are practices that many of you probably know, particularly in indigenous communities. Here's the example from Brazil and the Amazon rainforest, where Sonia Guajajara, a Brazilian activist, says, "For us, the wind speaks, the animals speak, the water speaks, the earth screams, and we understand and interpret these signs." So through the human body themselves, they can understand, due to their legacy on the land, due to the relationships and the relationality they practiced over generations, how to understand these signs. And sometimes this also takes, in some communities, the form of shamanism. So there are very different ways how this is interpreted, but I think this is more or less one end of the spectrum if we think about how such an interface could look like. The other end of the spectrum is a highly technological one. So here you see a tree with some sensors, and these sensors directly feed into a Twitter account, and there this beach, it's in Germany, in the forest, and it's run, this account, by the Thun Institute, tweets about their day. So I shrunk some millimeters, I transported some water, it's quite similar to yesterday, there's no more growth today, and my diameter is starting actually to shrink. And yeah, that's not only for plants. I think the most prominent example that's currently out there is with sperm whales. So there, the researchers, a large consortium, brought out sensors. They collect the communication between the sperm whales. They also observe the social behavior. And what they do currently is that they collect all these communication, try to identify communication patterns, and then at the end, even finally perform playback experiments to attempt bidirectional communication. There is, of course, on both ends of the spectrum, much to say about that, and here you can, of course, also think about how the algorithms and the technology that's developed by humans might influence the way these communication patterns are observed and evaluated. But I want to come to the third point, and this is about diversity. So when we speak, and then Danielle also already mentioned that she will not go into this, I will also only provide a rough idea on how this could be conceptualized. When we think about other planetary entities, the non-humans, then we have a great variety of these non-human agencies. So when you think about the history of democracy and how different parts liberated themselves, became part of our contemporary democracies, from women to disabled peoples with disabilities, then these were always groups of humans that were becoming part of our democracy. And I think these planetary entities are so different that we really have to step 3 steps back to first get some idea of what they are. You could start by planetary forces. So you can see that, for example, earthquakes like the one that hit Lisbon in 1755, or the volcano that led to the year without a summer, usually influence political and societal structures. And for example, the earthquake that hit Lisbon, also the Enlightenment ideas about how societies should relate to God and much more. So these planetary forces influence us humans and our political structures. And on the other side, we also already started, of course, to influence them. So through climate change, through melting ice, some volcanoes that were under ice shields are now more likely again to erupt. There's some research on that done in Iceland. Then we have these those that very often run as more than humans, usually, and most prominently, if you look at the literature right now, plants and animals, from bacteria to whole forest networks. Close here in Canberra, there's Octopolis and Atlantis, so two, as well, it's titled, it's again with this very anthropocentric view on this, but these are structures that are city-like or well, like small communities developed here in Bateman's Bay by octopus. And then you have all these technological agents. They range from ChatGPT that we, all of us probably have used at some point, but they also can be applied to very different aims. So when Repsol searches for the last bit of oil that they can dig, then this application of an artificial intelligence is of course very different from a global forest watch that tries to put together data on how the planetary forests develop. And then you have robots like those for elderly care, but you have also robots developed for military purposes. And if I would have to answer this question now in a very brief form, I would say, well, there are these 3 points. How can deliberative democracy listen to non-humans? By listening in a non-anthropocentric manner, by experimenting with various interfaces, and by taking planetary diversity into account. Thank you so much.